Hey, what's up guys? So as you can see from the video title, I wanted to talk about why you're not winning in Yu-Gi-Oh! And before you get a little defensive as if I'm attacking you, I think the whole point of this video is going to talk about the lessons I learned the way to finally doing well at premier events. Let's start from the beginning, right? I think we can all agree that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a pretty tough game. It has evolved a lot from like the playground Yu-Gi-Oh! That you all know and love. And I remember even myself, my story is that I got into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! 3 to 4 months after picking up the game towards the end of 2019, so like about the start of 2020. And honestly, it was really hard for a newer player to understand like all the different summoning mechanics, all the different rulings, interactions, what it means to properly sequence your cards, technical play, making the right reads. It was impossible. I even remembered being so overwhelmed that I actually looked up a SEMO video on how to link summon because I bought 3 Solomon Grade structure decks and I was like, dude, what are these blue monsters? Like, how do I summon them, right? I quickly found out that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a pretty tough game. Definitely not easy. It turns out there's a pretty big difference between just throwing cards on the table and playing your cards with purpose. So when YCS started resuming after COVID in 2022, I was really excited to travel to my first person YCS. I've only been to one other YCS at the time, which was YCS Vegas with Steven and Sam, but I never been to a solo YCS, in-person YCS. Like I never performed at one, I more played at one. And if you guys were following me at the time, you would know that the first 5 YCSs I attended, I didn't perform. I kept bubbling, I kept losing, and there was a multitude of factors, but it would be shameful of me to say that I didn't do well because of I just bricked or my opponent sacked me or all these other reasons. I think me being the type of person I am, I started to find the reasons why, and I think that shift in mindset is how I was able to perform. And I think for most people, when they're in that predicament, in that situation, when they don't perform the first 5 premier events they attended, they probably would have stopped because of the sink in time, money, and when you don't see results, it's easy to get discouraged. But I shifted my mindset and I really looked back into like what has changed, like how did I like start to perform. And I'll say the first piece is like determining if the games you're losing are within your control and be honest with yourself. So I remember that people come up to me at YCSs, they would say, hey, what's up, Pac, how are you? I'll be like, I'm doing good. They're like, I'm like, how are you doing in the tournament? They're like, yeah, I'm X2, bro, X3, like, I'm not doing too good. And they would always go on a rant about how they lost, right? Your friends probably do this to you too. Right within like the first couple of minutes of hearing the story, I could tell right away if they're capping, or if they actually could have played better. And I'm guilty of it too. I mean, at the end of the day, right, it can be quite embarrassing to tell your friends, content creators you look up to, that you punted, that you misplayed, or all those things. But at some point, the lies you keep telling others and yourself almost make it to a point where they're self-fulfilling. You will actually start believing that you couldn't have played better, that you could not have sequenced your hand better, or like you could not have made a better read on the back row, right? And I think when you do this, it can be pretty detrimental to your growth as a player. A good anecdotal story of this is I remember at YCS Charlotte, I played a good friend of mine, Christian Reina, on the bubble G, and I lost because I didn't ash his Phantasme, and he ended up drawing Nibiru off the Phantasme, which actually ended the game and my tournament run, and as stupid as that was, like I don't know what possessed me to not do it at the time, but it was clearly a mistake, and I quickly realized it after the match when I got nibbed. I'm like, wait a second, did you draw that Nibiru off the Phantasme? I'm like, what did I hold Ash for? Like, I was going for game. I should have just asked Phantasme, right? And like, it's that kind of like critical thinking, that reflection that made you realize like, okay, wait a second. I am not going to top this YCS because of this mistake I made, right? And admitting those gives me comfort that I could have played better. Like, that is critical to growth, right? So, and it's also important to note that like these small mistakes you like make at these like within these rounds, maybe I was X1 at the time and I made this mistake against Ginther, and now I'm X2, I'm still in the tournament, but it's important to note that like these small mistakes have ripple effects. That one match you lost can like change your whole tournament drastically, right? Yeah, that's kind of like how I got better, because even if I do like a lot of self-reflection in between these games, and even after Josh and I played our feature match at YCS Bologna, I remember he and I chatted in Top Cut, and we were like, Josh was like, hey, I could have played better, and I told him like, hey, I could have played better too. And it was so crazy because that like really goes to show that, like how the top players think. Always try to figure out like, okay, even though Josh won our match, like he was even like, wait, hold up, I didn't actually play the best I did. And I think like that type of like critical thinking is really, really important. That's the first aspect, admitting to mistakes mistakes and improving and learning from them. The second piece is learning how to play Yu-Gi-Oh is more important than learning how to play a specific deck. If you think about it, the reason why I'm able to consistently switch decks for every YCS and play them at a very high level is because I believe that mastering the fundamentals of Yu-Gi-Oh will give you a lot more mileage for your time. I will definitely concede the fact that it will take a lot more time if you're a newer player, because there's a lot to learn in the beginning, like understanding how chain links work, understanding what turn player priority means, understanding like rulings, interactions, like understanding all these things that have nothing to do with your deck, understanding turn player priority, understanding that on resolution you have priority to activate a fast effect. Like these are things that have nothing to do if you're playing an Unchained deck, if you're playing like a virtual deck, if you're playing a Pearly deck. These have nothing to do with those decks. It's about the game itself. And I think understanding the game at its core is much more important, because then you can like apply those fundamentals to multitudes of decks, right? Like understanding how the damage step works, like understanding how trigger effects works, and using that to your advantage. Those type of things about Yu-Gi-Oh, about the fundamentals of Yu-Gi-Oh is, in my opinion, much more important to learn than just learning like there's like the memorizing a combo. Because the truth of the matter is that like memorizing combos will not take you far, because it never actually works that way in a tournament. You will get hand trapped, you will get stopped, your opponent will interact with you. This game is not solitaire. And so as a result, like these combos that like people show off and like the spreadsheets and all that stuff, well, they're important to know, but you need to understand like why they work, how they work, instead of memorizing how they're being performed. I will say like one of the reasons why like some players who've been playing forever are leagues ahead is because they've experienced a lot of like these rulings, these interactions, like how all these things work, all the Yu-Gi-Oh fundamentals. They learned that way earlier on. If you looked at some of my first streams when I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh, it was actually me grinding Dueling Book, watching back my replays. I did this for months until I became really good at adapting to like the different game state, and all the experiences, all the lessons you learn from playing Yu-Gi-Oh, not playing a specific deck, playing Yu-Gi-Oh, will develop to what I call like this Yu-Gi-Oh game sense, right? Like other games would call this like game sense. I call this like your Yu-Gi-Oh game sense, like that kind of like being able to navigate game states or like make reads, all that kind of stuff, right? And I would say like Jesse is a really good example of this, right? Like he's refined his fundamentals and technical plays over the years to where he does not need to practice as much or play as much in order to do well YCSs. Like I have personally tested with Jesse, and all he does is theory. Like he doesn't even play. Like it came to the point where Jesse just pulls up to a YCS and just cooks people because of the game sense he develops from years of practice. I think for someone like myself, if you're a newer player, if you're someone looking to get better and get to that level, you're gonna have to work a little bit harder. He's been doing it since he was like 15, right? And that's what I kind of like did when I first started, like at like start of 2020, end of 2019. That's kind of like what I did. I had to play more than others. Like I had to be on Dueling Book. I had to like, because I need to make up the in time by getting more experience. Like for that lack of time that I don't have playing the game, I need more experience, and the only way to get more experience is to play more and play critically, right? Because you could play the game but not feel anything, right? Like you could mindlessly like I put cards on the table, do this, do that, like set a couple stuff. When you play and you're trying to improve, you should always be critically thinking about, okay, how should I sequence my hand in order to play around Draw and Lockbird, because I know that's a very common card in the format. If that's the case, should I start with this normal summon? But does that expose me to Valor and Imperm? Does that even matter? Like, do I lose those two cards anyways? Should I just start with the most powerful normal summon? You know, these are things that should be going through the back of your head. If you're looking to get better at the game, there's like no shortcut. Reading about how like a deck works is not gonna help you get there. Like you're gonna need that game experience, right? How many people at a YCS play like the tier 1 deck? How many people play Rescue Ways? Why is it so few making top cut? Why is it like the same players making top cut? It's because like you could be playing the same deck as someone else, but you could be playing it so different, it's not even close. Like one person looks like a surgeon, the other guy looks like a first year nurse. The third piece I wanted to cover was you're playing the best deck, but you're not playing the best deck choice for an event. And I think it's natural to gravitate towards the preconceived best deck, and to be quite honest, sometimes there isn't any other choice. We can look to tier 0 formats like Tier Elements, and if you're trying to figure out a meta call, it was borderline impossible. The deck was just too powerful. It had outs to every scenario. Like the only deck that could really compete toe to toe, engine to engine, was essentially the Mirror. But there are a lot of formats in Yu-Gi-Oh where it isn't just dominated by one deck, and I think when I attend premier events, I always try to block out as much noise as possible, really sit down and determine which decks are good deck choices. It's time consuming. Like it's not, I'm not saying like this is something you figure out day one of like, you know, sitting stuff down, like it's time consuming. That's what people have to understand, that when I'm sitting down trying to figure out which decks are good, I'm like trying all these decks out and understanding at a core what their pros are and what their win conditions are, what their lose conditions are, and how they fare into matchups, right? How does this deck fare into the Fire King matchup? Like, how does this deck fare into the Rescue Ace matchup, right? Like, does this deck have an inherent advantage against the top tier 1 decks? If so, where does it have that advantage? And is the advantage enough to carry me to a victory even though my deck is slightly weaker, right? So things like these are what you're gonna have to like think through, right? And the other important thing is that like when someone says X is good, Y is good, it's really important that you really try to determine if it's actually good or bad because of your own testing. Like, this is like really important. I think this is like the most important thing, which is like you should have like conviction when you submit a deck list for a YCS. Like, it shouldn't, you know, obviously you can be a little bit nervous about the tournament and stuff like that, but you should be like, you should have your own conviction and your own like thought process. Like, hey, like I think from my own testing, I think this is good, right? And at the end of the day, if you don't have enough time or if you're not confident, like you can always reach out to other people to get their insight. But at the end of the day, it's you. Like, you're the one that should be making the decision, right? It's kind of like, I think net decking is great, and then net decking and improving on someone else's deck is even better. Taking someone else's deck, but mindlessly like just submitting it is not, I think, the best way to like perform. I think it can maybe get you there, but it's not like the best way to do well. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just, I think if you're looking to do better, like it's not gonna get you there. Yeah, if you don't have time, then you can refer to creators that you trust or like friends for some insight. Hire a coach to maybe get you to that next step. Like a good example is like, I remember like Joshua Schmidt, like he reached out to me. He was like, he wasn't testing out as much, right? Because of the time constraints and all this stuff. And he asked me for my opinion on what decks I thought were good. I think this was around like maybe Euros, if I'm trying to remember. He asked me for my opinion on like the Pearly deck. And I explained to him like what my thoughts are on Pearly, its matchup, its pro, like what's some weaknesses, like what advantages does it have, all this stuff, like why I think it's actually a good pick, why I played for the last 2 events I played. And at the end of the day, Josh didn't blindly listen to me, thank God. Like, but he took it, he applied his own unique spin to it, he critically thought about what I said and if I was actually right or wrong, and then ran with it, right? But like I said, at the end of the day, is like you're making a decision, you're critically thinking. Don't just blindly follow XYZ opinion. You can ask them for their suggestions, but don't blindly follow. The last piece is about that you're adding cards to your deck because you like them, not because they're objectively good. And I know we're all guilty of this, okay? Like, you have that one favorite card, you just got to throw in your deck, okay? Like, I get that. Because when people send me decks to review, like, I just find this happening all the time to the point where I kind of want to talk about it. Because I have, like, done a lot of coaching. I have reviewed people's deck lists and stuff like that. And one of the things I want to ask them is, like, why are you playing that card? More often than not, the scenario people present to me is like, dude, if pigs started raining tomorrow, like, you need that card for that one situation that happens maybe once every 10th moon where, like, the moon turns red. Like, I'm just like, it's like, dude, like, maybe you should take it out. And they're like, nah, but I want that card. I need that card. And so, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like people are, like, emotionally attaching themselves to certain cards rather than objectively saying, like, is this card, like, good to play in the deck? At the end of the day, all this is to really say, like, you know, rely on math instead of subjective feelings when it comes to deck building, so you don't have regrets, right? Because even if you don't misplay on a technical perspective at the YCS or at the premier event you're going to, when it comes to playing the deck, like when it comes to building the deck, you might have misplayed there, and that might explain why you're not doing as well, right? I actually have an anecdotal experience example of this where after I won YCS Palo, I would say my technical play with Unchained was even better. Like, I played Unchained even better at YCS Vancouver, but guess what? I didn't even top YCS Vancouver. Not because I misplayed, but because I didn't build my deck correctly. I had 45 cards in the deck for no reason, and it was off the backbone of emotion. I'm like, dude, I just won with the Unchained Soul of Disaster in my deck. How can I take this boy out? You know what I'm saying? This boy was he's my boy. You know what I'm saying? I kept him in, and I drew that card like it was my job every hand, and I lost 3 matches that event, and every match I lost was because I bricked. Every game I was able to draw even a remotely playable hand regardless of the dice roll, I won. And guess what I did? I took my own advice, and the YCS after in YCS Cancun, I decided to trim the fat down and made my Unchained deck 40 cards. I took out every unnecessary card, only kept in the necessary cards to play the game, to perform, and I topped because I just didn't brick it all in Swiss, and I was able to play every game. And because I knew that my technical play was very good with the deck, what I had to fix was the deck building component, which is something that goes overlooked because sometimes you will actually get sacked. Like, you will definitely like get completely demolished by your opponents, but you also have to consider all the times like, okay, like if I can't control the technical play aspect, what could I have controlled? And it's important that like, you know, you're in a healthy relationship with yourself in the sense that, like, you know, you control what you can. Like, there are some things you will not be able to control, but the most important part about it is, like, just being honest with yourself, right? Like, you don't need to cap to anyone else. Just, you know, just keep it real. That's gonna conclude the video. Let me know if you agree or disagree with some of the points I made in the comment section below. And if you would like additional videos explaining any of the points I mentioned above, then please let me know and subscribe. Without further ado, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.